Sound is.
Nick, almost 60 years ago, a little film called Zorba the Greek hit cinemas, and for better or for worse, for many non-Greeks, it was their first introduction to Greece, Greeks, and Greek music. Either way, it's an important piece of work, isn't it?
Definitely is, Tom. And look, it's more about the book as well. It's about the people, about the music, and about everything, which I'm sure we're going to discuss.
Yeah, a Michael Kakionis film that starred Anthony Quinn, Alan Bates, and Irene Pappas, just to name a few.
Legends.
I'm guessing you would have watched the film as a kid. What impression did it leave on you initially?
The impression it left on me changed over the years. I've seen it a few times now, and I saw it recently. It's more about how others perceive Greeks in this film. The more I watch it, the more inspired I get, the more passionate I get. And it's more about the times of people that lived around that era and how they lived and how they perceived life in general, which I'm sure we're going to cover off in quite a lot of detail. Yeah, and you mentioned there the book. I mean, it's much more than just that film. In fact, the original text by legendary Greek author Nikos Kazantzakis, in my opinion, is an absolute masterpiece. The film simply didn't manage to encapsulate all that messaging, which we'll talk about, but the film also spawned arguably an even greater legacy in the form of its music, thanks to the work of the late legend Mikis Theodorakis. I mean, an absolute legend, wasn't he? He is. And like I said, I just can't wait for you to introduce our guests so we can get into the nitty-gritty of this.
Okay, well, we do need some help with this, obviously, and true to form, we've managed to enlist the help of some pretty heavy hitters, thankfully. First off, Professor Vrasidas Karalis teaches modern Greek studies at the University of Sydney, where he holds the Sir Nicholas Laurentos Chair in Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies. Zorba is part of what he teaches, and he's given lectures and written essays and books on the topic extensively. He's published on the topics of Byzantine historiography, Greek political life, Greek cinema, European cinema, literary criticism, and contemporary political philosophy. He's the editor of the Modern Greek Studies Journal of Australia and New Zealand, and has also edited volumes on modern European political philosophy, especially on Martin Heidegger, Hannah Arendt, and Cornelius Castoriadis. His books include Recollections of Mr. Manoli Laskaris, The Demons of Athens, A History of Greek Cinema, Realism and Post-War Greek Cinema, Reflections on Presence, and the Cinematic Language of Theo Agelopoulos. Professor, welcome to Ouzo Talk.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you.
We are absolutely
very
honoured to have you here.
It's a pleasure, first of all, and then a nice parea feeling, as you understand, to be here and discuss about this seminal text and very important cultural, if I may say, context for this book.
Absolutely.
As well, and the movie as well, and the music.
Absolutely. And Nick, we have another returning guest, would you believe? We just couldn't do this podcast without the help of Sydney Olympics conductor, composer, and genuine Mikis Theodorakis expert, George Ellis. George, welcome back.
Good to be back. It's you can't keep me away.
Yeah,
it's great to have you
You've
back,
come
Georgie
home,
boy.
effectively.
Basically, my parents owned a house across the road, so I'm back home virtually.
So just on that, the reason why, I mean, if we did George's introduction as well, we'd be here till next week. So if you haven't heard our dedicated podcast with George, now's a good time to go back and hear his full story. So make sure you go back and listen to that episode.
It is. It's a great story. Well worth it.
Thank
Are
you.
you ready to have a
Welcome
drink
back,
again?
Say again?
Are you ready to have a drink again?
Oh boy,
We overdid it last time.
I might make up for it today.
Tom, I think we have to let our listeners know. We already had a few drinks.
We have.
The party's already started. The party has already kicked off.
The spirit of Zorba is already here. Okay, so I think the stage is set, Nick, shall we?
I think so, mate. Let's go. Bring it on.
Στην υγεία μας, παιδιά, thank you for being here.
Yamas.
Στην υγεία μας, boys.
Bravo.
Should I say aspropato again?
Absolutely.
I think you should.
Why not?
For those
Aspropato.
aspropato. For those that don't understand what that means, it means white bottom. In other words,
empty
chug
bottom.
it down, empty bottom.
That's it.
White bottom,
That's
chug
it.
it down one hit.
Nothing wrong with an astropato.
Well, let's start this little session on the right
okay.
foot with this quote from the film. Life is trouble, only death is not. To be alive is to undo your belt and look for trouble. One of my favourite quotes from that film.
My belt's slightly undone from last night's dinner, so that works out well.
Mine's still tight. It's got to come undone.
Oh dear. So, what are we drinking today, Nick?
Compliments of our good friend Nick Andriatakis. He brought us a beautiful bottle of Cretan Tsikoudea.
Yes, he did.
Amazing stuff. Like we said, Tsipro, what a great drink. Cretans call it Sikodia. Northern Epirol call it Sipro, I think.
Sipro, no.
Cretans call it, another word called Rakia.
Raki.
Which might be, is that the old Turkish Ottoman term? Yeah.
Raki.
And the Italians call it Grappa.
Grappa.
But essentially it's all the same thing, isn't it?
It's moonshine.
It is. Yeah.
Aniseed.
It is.
Yeah.
And
Well, there's no aniseed in that one, actually.
No
it
aniseed.
isn't.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing is this is leftover grapes. That's how they make
That's
Cipro.
right.
So they got, it's the seeds, the stem, the skin of grapes.
Right.
So once they've made their beautiful wines, the leftover they make Cipro or
Right.
grappa or whatever you want to call it.
Wow.
And then from there they feed the rest of the cattle. So they're the ultimate environmentalists, these Greek farmers. Yeah,
We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Great.
Well, let's start.
It
Look,
tastes great.
Look, Vrasidas, you've actually met and spoken to Alan Bates, I understand, who played the role of Basil in the film, or the narrator in the book.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that encounter to kick us off.
Well, Alan Bates was, if you remember, was in love with a Greek actress, Betty Arvaniti, if you remember, and one of the most important Greek actresses. We met once, and I wanted him to explain to me how he participated in that film, because usually his roles, until then, were B movies, as you understand. In America, he did in England and then in the United States, and that was a defining moment in his career. So he explained to me how he worked with Anthony Quinn and how he worked with Kakoyannis and, of course, Irene Pappas, who was probably the most crucial figure in that film as well, together with Lila Kendrova, who is the tragic figure of
Madame Hortense.
Madame Hortense, the tragic figure of human sensuality and sexuality, essentially, epitomizing that thing. Yeah, he was quite, just, if I may say, happy about this participation. He said essentially it reinvented his career and made him as an international star that very few people knew before that, and then he became an international star. He was even a candidate, I think, for Oscar or one of these awards back then, but they didn't give it to him. But it was probably one of the most important films that exposed him to international audience. Sure. And probably Zorba the Greek is the most successful Greek film made mostly by non-Greek actors. And it's very interesting that the main actors are not Greek. They're just, Zorba, Anthony Quinn, Alan Bates, and then, as I said, Lila Kendrova, who actually in the beginning was planned to be Simone Signoret, the famous French actress Simone Signoret, the most important existentialist actress of that period. But she said she found the role extremely tragic for her. Right. And that would destroy her image as an actress. So Lila Kendrova, and she was awarded the Oscar for the supporting role.
Fantastic.
Wow, unbelievable.
Yeah. But how good was Anthony Quinn in the movie? He's not even Greek, but he looked more Greek than Greeks.
Well, it depends on what you mean of Greek. He created an image of Greek, right, of being Greek. I think he was. I mean, the interesting thing about Anthony Quinn as an actor in general is that he was always himself. Yeah, and that gave him a certain authenticity when he performed these roles. And his Greek role was very important. I think the Greek persona, the mask of the Greek, was very good because essentially it suited him. He was a multicultural actor from Mexico, America, just South America, and I think somewhere in the Middle East. It was a sort of a kind of actor who combined styles of performance.
But he epitomized the image of Greeks back then in the 60s. Confident,
He created it.
He created it. But I'm sure we all know, he's saying that because of his acting abilities that Greeks ended up becoming like that, or Greeks were like that?
I think the question is, was life imitating art, or the other way around in this sense?
Well, if you see him in his movies in Italy, for example, right, it's the same thing. He's a perfect Italian there. I think it's a great ability of the actor to become the role he or she impersonates. Yeah. But I think there are very strong elements of the Greek character as well, especially in a period after the Second World War, when there was this feeling of oppression by the government, but at the same time of optimism. That things will become better in the future. It was a period of optimism that Greece was under reconstruction. in a few years will become better. Don't forget that between 55 and 69 we have the so-called economic Greek miracle. Greek economy was developing together with Japan more than any other economy of the world.
Would you say that the book that he wrote and the movie that got released put Greece on the map?
First of all, the book. The book became very popular, especially in France, Germany, and then finally, with its English translation in 1956, became one of the best sellers for over a period of 50 years. It's the only, if I may say, Greek novel that is reprinted to this day.
Wow. Is that right? Wow.
We estimate 38 reprints of the novel.
38 reprints.
And translated into 67 different languages.
And throw in audiobooks as well now, and that that will obviously equate to even more.
I mean, it's a very popular book, believe it or not, in the Arab countries.
Right.
Wow.
Everybody loves that in the Arab countries. In Israel it was a cult figure, Zorba, just not before the film. And also, believe it or not, in India, in Vietnam, in China.
Wow. I didn't
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It is the most successful book for many, many years. And of course, for some of you, I mean, you're younger, you haven't lived that with the 60s generation. It epitomized what we call the seduction of the Mediterranean, has been called, right? That sexuality, that sensuality beyond restrictions, beyond, if I may say, repression. And then finally, something that the Northern Europeans had, guilt.
Okay, very interesting.
Wow.
There was no, if you see, I mean, the most important aspects of the film is the absence of guilt that we have.
Very good point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like we said in the introduction, it's more than just the book. It's the book, it's the movie, it's the music, it's the dance. I'm sure every Greek known to man has danced the Zorba at
It
every
has
freaking
created
wedding.
a culture, let's say,
It has.
with all these elements.
Yeah.
And if I may say, in this case, the most important thing in the film is, beyond the story and these kind of things, is the photography of the most important Greek from England, Walter Lassalle. He's English, from Germany, Anglo-Irish from Germany, who actually died in Greece.
Wow.
And
so you mean the recording of the film? What do you mean by
The
photography?
cinematography, you mean?
the cinematography,
Okay,
we call it in Greek the photography, the cinematography, let's say the one who was behind the camera. The director gives directions how to do that, but somebody is behind the camera.
Yes.
And that was Walter Lassalle.
Okay.
Walter Lassalle, who received the Oscar for this as well, which is amazing. The cinematographer, one of the best cinematographers in Europe.
Yeah.
And died in 2009, I think, in Crete, because he became a local. Then, I mean, the way that he created these sculptural Greek forms, people who come out of the landscape, the rocks, of the mountains, of the sea, and this very stark, austere, Doric, black and white. Just photography that created photography. It's probably one of the best aspects of the film. You can see that the film has, as you said, this Greek element, but has also archetypal elements in there as well, which Lassalle actually brought them to the fore and to the consciousness, make them visually obvious.
It's not something that's often spoken about with that film, is it? Now that you mention it, it's fantastic work.
You can visualize it, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the creative, because Greece usually is the blue of the Mediterranean, right? I mean, you see Santorini, you see Mykonos, and these kind of things. There, you see a black and white Greece, but it's much more, if I may say, Greek than the blue, the blue of the Mediterranean of Santorini and Mykonos.
Would it work in colour in that context?
Well, if you remember, Kakoyannis, the director, had worked with black and white in probably the most important film that he made, Electra, with the music of Theodorakis, which I think, as you play the guitar, you have to try that music. This is an incredible music that Theodorakis composed for that film. When he tried colour, he was not as successful as in black and white.
Because it was a choice at that point. Colour film obviously did
exist.
Yeah, and this was 20th Century Fox. It's not like they didn't have the money to do it.
And it's 1964.
1964.
Not 1930.
Yeah. But I think he avoided the artificiality of Panavision and Technicolor that we had back then. He wanted to maintain that essentially black and white meant what? nostalgia,
Yes.
Right.
the past.
Yep.
Right.
And actually, see, it's not black and white, and a sepia. In many occasions, a sepia color they're going there.
Great
and
point.
he knew very well how to do that. So it indicates that this is a nostalgic reconstruction of a lost past,
We've just got a whole new perspective on it.
Me too.
That's unbelievable.
Wow.
which is a magnificent way how he did it. You know, Lassalle and Kakoyannis accept that because he created. And as you see, the way that he used the camera is that you could see not simply the forms, but the volume of the body. I mean, he created this incredible sculptural perception of the images of human bodies.
Yeah.
Recreating, as he said, the frieze of the Parthenon. That was his idea. So how can I recreate depth in the images there? And Lassalle and Kakoyannis did that. So I think that's a very important thing to see that created, as you said, Nick, a culture, which is the music as well, and the dance at the end, which is the unofficial hymn of Greece, essentially the national anthem of Greece.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And it's the original.
Everyone knows the Zorba thing.
Well, I was just going to say, just on the dance and the music, George, I mean, let's just talk quickly about your first impression of that, seeing that. What does it evoke for you, given that you are a conductor, composer? What does it evoke for you personally?
It evokes freedom and wildness and the ability to, or the want to let go of your inhibitions. It does it because it builds, it crescendos, it accelerandos, it gets faster, it gets stronger, it gets louder, and it gets more and more wild. And the wilder it gets, the more you relate to letting go of your troubles and just go, fuck it, I'm free.
Yeah.
Wow. I've never heard it explained like that.
And Theodorakis knew exactly what he was doing by starting off with a simple guitar strumming, tonic to dominant, 1 and 5 and 1, and then doing just a single bouzouki and then a double bouzouki, and then by the end of it, and you know, we've done it with the Greek Festival of Sydney, and we've orchestrated it, and it's massive when the orchestra, and in the movie, you know, it builds, but also when we do it live, when the orchestra is at full flight, it's like a freight train, and you can't, if you got in its way, you'd be gone.
Andre Rieu did a great rendition of that.
Yeah, we tend to do it because we love Mikis Theodorakis' music so much. We perform it all the time. Yep. And, you know, even the years when we say, oh, we did Zorba last year, let's not do Zorba theme this year, but we do it. And then we go, oh, we did it last year, let's not do it this year, but we do it. Even when we don't put it in the program, we use it as an encore because we just can't help ourselves. I don't mean this to sound negative. It is a hackneyed piece. By hackneyed, of course, I mean it's played, it's overplayed. But you just can't, for me, speaking personally, I can't not play it.
Yeah.
It's just so wonderful. I love how it starts so simply and slowly and without any kind of thick texture, and it builds into this. Basically, it's a giant orgasm.
Freight train.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Dionysian.
You just summed it up.
Yes.
It's a Dionysian element at the end. I think what you see is a gradual thing, and it goes to an orgasmic Dionysian orgasm, essentially, because I think the book represents this, according to Kazantzakis, this dichotomy that Nietzsche first observed in the Greek tradition, the Apollonian and the Dionysian element.
This is what Nick and I were talking about the other day. That exactly.
Yeah, look, that's just so, the way you just described it then, I've never actually thought, I feel that, but I never could think of, articulate the words to explain what you just said. It's just so Greek. How we start very conservative and passive, and then we end up like this
Wild
orgasmic freight train, like you just described it.
Yeah, that's exactly what
And
it is.
it becomes, it's a more frenzied afterward, you know, because
It's a
essentially
That's Greek. That's
the
Greeks.
The purpose of dancing is ecstasy. Ecstasy in Greek means besides myself, to be beside myself. Ex istame, get out of myself. So this ecstatic element that we see in the film is amazing, because don't forget that Theodorakis, at the end of his life, developed this idea, which I gave a lecture in the Greek community, that essentially the purpose of modern Greek music is to connect with the ancient Greek music.
Fantastic.
And he actually tried, as he said, with his tragedies and his operas, at the end of his life, to connect with the first Greek songs that we have survived, the Sikylos song and some songs from the Euripides' tragedies. And he calls it the Cosmic Symphony. And Theodorakis evolved as well from 1964 to later on into a composer of immense understanding. But unfortunately, as I say, people think that Zorba is only a dance, a sort of a music, but it's not. No. It's something. What do you think?
Oh, there's the music to the film in general is amazing. I mean, when Anthony Quinn's character Zorba, of course, says that he was married and he had a house and he had children, and he calls it the full catastrophe. Yeah. The music that follows that is just beautiful. And there's sad moments in the movie. I mean, there's deaths in the movie. There's a suicide in the movie.
There's murder,
obviously. Yeah, a murder.
And a death, the plundering of the widow of Madame Hortense.
Exactly. And the music to that is gorgeous. And there's not only bouzouki, there's accordion, there's strings. It's not just Zorba, as we know. It's not just the theme, Zorba's dance. That is what we were talking about before. That's brilliant. But the rest of the movie he was a great film scorer. He was a great composer of film.
For years, I'm trying to find someone in Sydney University to work on his scores as well, because before that, he made the score for Electra, but also for 2 film noirs from France.
Sorry, just explain what scores means to our listeners.
Also, scoring a film is writing the music for the film.
Okay,
so
perfect.
He was a beautiful scorer of films and opera, and well, I mean, you don't need me. I think everybody that knows me knows how much I love. To me, he was the best composer that's ever lived.
Yeah,
wow. And if you see one of his first films was the Barefoot Battalion, the Xipolito Tagma. Everything is like Wagner. Wow. A huge Wagnerian symphony with winds, with drums, with xylophones. When you hear that, because it's about 190 orphans during the German occupation in Thessalonica tried to survive by stealing from Germans. Xipolito Tagma, very great film, by the way, great film.
So, I mean, as well as the music to Zorba and all the operas and the other films we've been talking about, he wrote a wonderful oratorio, people would know, Axionisti, from which we get Tisikiosin, Noite, etc. Now, there are some popular songs from that oratorio, which I just mentioned one of, but it starts with a movement called Genesis. And Genesis, the music to that is befitting of any brilliant 20th century composer from, Europe, any other part of Europe or any other part of the world. And it's phenomenally complex and, very esoteric. And at the same time, this same person wrote Varka sto Yalo, which is almost a childlike song.
Yeah.
I can't get my head around how one person could write Varka sto Yalo and Genesis from Axionisti. The mind boggles.
Wow. Well, I think for me, Theodorakis, because I've written an essay recently on him, combined popular culture with high culture.
Yes.
What you say in the beginning of Genesis is, I think, a homage to his teacher in France, Olivier Messiaen.
Yes.
I mean, he composed, the oratorio about the end of the world that he composed, just the Messiaen oratorio, symphony for the end of the world. And Theodorakis, later in his life, after he finished this political thing, he revisited this past, as you understand. And that's why we see that in 1940, he was only 19, 20 years old. Yeah. He made this incredible orchestration of the funeral service of the Greek Orthodox Church, of the Kassiani Troparion of the Great Tuesday, of the Megalis Εβδομάδας, of the week of the Passion. And he's an incredible composer, I think, of, as you said, combining in Margarita y Margaró,
which is as pop and as catchy as a song as you'll ever hear.
Exactly, with the beginning of Axionisti, which is
I mean, even in Axionisti, he starts with Genesis, but then he goes to Enatochelidoni, a few movements later. Enatochelidoni is catchy, clap, everybody in the audience when we perform it, clap along, but you can't clap along to Genesis.
No. But then you have at the end, as you remember, the Magnificat, the Doxastiko.
The Doxastiko is one of my favorite pieces of music.
Which is probably the greatest, if I may say, since you mentioned that, I believe stands next to the ninth, the chorals part of the ninth,
Beethoven's
Ninth.
Ode to Joy, the Ninth Symphony, the last movement.
And the way that it is done is, just like eclectic song, bang, 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 from the beginning till the end, and then interrupted with modern music, and then bang, 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 bang. It becomes, this is really a sort of a kind of one of the most, I believe, that Doxastikon in particular, should have been one of the, it was used for a period as an anthem of UNESCO.
Wow.
UNESCO.
Yeah, right. So you said clefs like Northern Greeks.
Yeah.
Like Epirotes.
Epirotes, yeah. We're the Peloponnesians here, right?
Well, okay, so we've spoken about some of these elements, amazing cinematography, an amazing story to start with, incredible music to put it together, fantastic actors as well. As a piece of literature, why is Zorba so important? And why has it endured, do you think?
First of all, it's very well written. It's the first novel that Kazantzakis wrote as a mature man. He has written some in his early youth. And his Greek language is not as excessive or exuberant as the other novels he wrote.
Right.
Then, if you read the book, it's a very experimental book. It sounds, it sounds traditional and this kind, but the book is about a book within a book within a book within a book.
Yes.
There are 4 novels evolving at the same time. First of all, if you read the introduction, as I said, of the complete edition, it says that this has to do with my life in Berlin and Vienna after the First World War.
Right.
Then he goes on with his life under the German occupation. Then, during the German occupation, he wants to write the book. This is in the book, right? His recollections from Yorgos Zorbas that he had met in 1917 when they tried to do that. So I said the recollection. Then he talks about himself trying to write a book about Yorgos Zorbas. And then within Zorba the Greek has the writer, Alan Bates in this case, to try to write a play about Buddha, which does not appear almost in the English translation.
Yes.
So you have a book, tries to write another book, and another book, and another book. If you read the interesting key to the understanding of this book is the final pages, which says, now, I wrote the book about Zorba, which is about me remembering of Zorba, which is about Zorba and me through the letters that Zorba sent me.
Wow.
So it's a very, despite its simplicity, I think the secret of the success is the utter simplicity of this complex structure. Kazantzakis tried to write about all these things. First of all, First World War and him, Second World War, because this book was written in 1943, and he said, we have nothing to do. Back then, we didn't have a radio. The Germans had confiscated the radio. So what am I going to do? I'm going to actually start relating the stories about Yorgos Zorba to my wife and the friends from Aegina, because he lived in the island of Aegina back then. And he writes about him, telling the story about him in 1917. And then he really has these incredible letters by Zorba when he went to Yugoslavia back then, and he says, he sends him a letter and says this incredible, I have to say that in Greek because it's amazing, Evron, I found, Petran Prasinin, a green stone, Oreotatin, Elthe amesos, in ancient Greek, come fast, come quick, come here up there, which is a magnificent thing. And, how he incorporates a story within a story within a story, and it's what we call a sort of a multi-narrative style. I want to avoid academic expressions here.
Fantastic.
And parallel narratives, the one after the other.
Sure.
Intensely biographical.
And then biographical, the story, if you remember, of his friend who died in the Caucasus region,
which doesn't feature in the film at all.
At all. And has this incredible letters that his friend sent him, which I believe in one of the masterpieces of Greek prose, and every prose, because it talks about, they were both in love with the same woman, and they were in Switzerland, and he has all this, just what Freud would have called disturbances of memory, which is a magnificent structure of the book, and I think that very few people have noticed, because of, as I said, the truncated translation into English,
right?
The complexities, the multi-layered structure of the book, and most importantly, for the very strong political element there, the very strong sexual element in the book, and the very strong, narrative element. Greeks, as you said, Nick, before, tell stories. I mean, it's an amazing story, and it's not. In modern Greek literary criticism, we think that the only character created by modern Greek literature is Zorba. I mean, real character that you can, you have in Australia, we have Stan Parker by Patrick White. In America, we have this and that and this in English. The only literary character produced in Greece is Zorba.
Wow, it's crazy. Look, can I just take that right back to the beginning now? I want to know about Nikos Kazantzakis, who wrote the book. What do you know about Nikos and the time he grew up, and what's his experience? Because obviously his experiences come through in the book. Do you know much about Nikos Kazantzakis?
Everything.
Where he grew up? So we'll start off with that. I think that'll give us a nice transition into why he wrote the book and his thought process. And so, because he did write the book in his, how old was he? 48, you said? And the book got published.
49, yeah, almost 50, yeah.
So he had quite a lot of worldly experience by that stage.
Well, Kazantzakis is, if I may say, the only Greek writer who was not afraid to travel.
Sure.
And he said that the only things that keep me alive is travels and books.
Because he had a really hard, fierce father, didn't he? Because his father
who later appears in the movie, in the book Kapitan Michalis, of Freedom and Death, as we see later on, which is an amazing book, as you will see. And I think it's because he describes the struggle of the Cretan people to be liberated from the Turks, as he said, from the eyes of my childhood, where all people are giants. Because when you are 6 years old, everyone is a giant, in front of you. And it's this incredible conflict. So Kazantzakis was born, what we know, in 1888 in Crete, in the Heraklion of Crete. Himself thought that he was from a village called Varvari, the barbarians, and he thought it was a great honor for him to be a barbarian, because essentially that means that he was not simply Cretan, but because he thought, he called himself the Cretan Philhellene. Yeah, because he believed that Crete, being between Asia, Africa, and Europe,
was
essentially
in between.
connected.
Was in between.
Continents.
In between,
Right.
creates these three, the osmosis, if I may say, the convergence of three continents and three cultures at the same time. I think you will know Yehudi Menuhin loved Crete because he went to Crete to see how they play the lira.
Cretan lira, right?
Yeah, he thought that was a very unique sort of a form of presentation there, which obviously if you go to Crete, you will see the Arabic presence, the Ottoman presence, the Greek presence, and even the Slavic presence. So it is
They
a
were
mix.
very hard people back then, weren't they, the Cretans, at that time when he grew up? Because I did read there was a saying where Athenians would eat a boiled egg, the Spartans would eat a boiled egg with a shell on, and the Cretans would eat the boiled egg with a shell on and the plate.
Well, going back to Theodorakis, he's from Crete.
Oh, there you go.
He was born in Crete.
Yeah, that's why he wanted to be buried there
Yes,
in Crete.
that's right. And he was.
He was buried.
So Nikos Kazantzakis ended up meeting a real person called Yorgos Zorbas.
In 1917, for many reasons, people have speculated why, during this, just before the First World War, and before, when Venizelos created a sort of a kind of a split national division in Greece, as we call it, he went to Mani, not to Crete, for mining in a quarry, just built, to find lignitis, what do we call it?
Lignite
like
mining,
brown
which
coal.
features in the story.
In the book. The story is relocated in Crete, but in reality it happened in Mani.
Ah, right, okay.
Right.
Yes, it's a type of brown coal, isn't it?
Yeah. And but he failed, of course, and I think, and Zorba showed him, buzz off now, you have more serious things to do.
But did he meet the Yorgos Zorbas, the real person? Was he a monk at Mount Athos? I believe that's where they met.
Well, what he says is that he tried to become a monk, but he failed.
Too much Ouzo.
Okay.
Too much Ouzo, exactly. Yeah.
Cyprol. I think we worked out Cyprol was
Too
first.
much sex.
Yeah.
And then he became sort of involved with the army, just the liberation of Macedonia, and then he became this, and because that's why he has this, if I may say, post-national perception. Where all of this, I saw the Greeks committing that, I saw the Turks committing that, I saw the Bulgarians committing that, and as he says, bugger them all. When this is not human, we have to go beyond that, as he says. And I think that explains the 60s, the generation of the 60s appropriation of Zorba.
Right.
But there was something about Yorgos Zorbas that attracted him to it. And therefore he wrote a book. So what was it about Zorba? Was it his freedom? There was something about his
freedom. Then he's, as I said, he's a post-national character. We're talking about the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
We're talking about nationalism was at its worst.
Nico's experiences with his Yorgo.
Then don't forget that Nico after that left and went to Moscow, Berlin, and then to Moscow, and then he went to Siberia. I remember in his letters to Vrasidas, he says, I stayed in Siberia for 3 months. I inserted in my brain the 1/5 of human knowledge. He was reading constantly, he had nothing else to do in Siberia back then.
True.
And then he traveled. I mean, the important thing with Kazantzakis is that he's traveling. He understood that human beings in the future, we have what we call today here a transnational identity. Not simply a multicultural, transnational.
Right.
We can experience different cultural identities and still be ourselves. It's like you, for example. You're born in Australia, aren't you?
Yeah.
So you feel as Greek Australian. So you move between
Both cultures.
You're a transcultural individual, not simply multicultural. Transcultural individual. You move, you exist, and you're yourself. In this case, you're not. The Australian element is not separate from the Greek element. They impact on each other.
Yeah, great.
It's like and plus a musician, plus a conductor, plus this. What do you think?
We talked about that last time, and that is when you're in Australia, you feel your Greekness, and when you're in Greece, you feel your Australianness, and you feel both in both countries. And they're separable to a degree, but they're inseparable eventually or from the start. And so, this duality, which is both not disarming, but it's definitely. It makes you feel whole, like it feels like 1 + 1 =
Okay.
That's great.
But sometimes you feel like you're part of one culture, but then you're not. Is it sort of a lonely feeling as well? Like we live in Australia, we've got an Australian culture, we're sort of part Greek, which maybe might be a minority, but in Greece we're like the minority because we're the sort of in between as well.
That's kind of what that's what I meant when I said disarming. But in the end, for me, no, because it's comforting to know that I have the other. It completes the other half. I don't feel. I see what you're saying, and at first I feel like that, but then I go, actually, that's not true at all. I'm both, and I love both, and I don't want to be just one. I don't want to be just Australian. I love that I'm Greek Australian. To me, it makes me feel amazing that I'm both. And the both are one, if that makes sense.
It's like a new culture in itself.
Exactly right. It's not just Greek, not just Australian, but it's like it's being purple. You're not blue, you're not red, you're absolutely purple. And in your blueness, you feel you're red. In your redness, you feel you're blue. That to me is what it means to be Greek Australian.
Very interesting.
And I think you have to see that in Theodorakis as well.
Yes.
Theodorakis composed the most Spanish music in canto general,
Yes.
right?
Pablo Neruda.
Pablo Neruda, canto general. I mean, it's the ability of people today to see things not from one perspective as well. Identity is something fluid, changes, transforms, transmutates, becomes this and that at the same time. We have to learn, as I said, the condition of modernity is that we have to learn to live with ambiguities. And move between them.
Yes.
And we are both at the same time, plus something else, which cannot be deducted from your cultural origins as well, because essentially our motherland is our childhood.
Sure.
I mean, childhood is, what is this? What is childhood? Just it's a time, not simply a place, but it's a place, but also a temporal end. And I think that Kazantzakis encoded that so well, especially in Zorba, but I think that he managed to do it in his magisterial autobiography, Report to Greco. Don't forget that the diasporic identity,
Sorry, Report to Greco. Is this El Greco, the painter, the artist?
El Greco, the epitome and the beginning of diasporic identity is El Greco. A Cretan becomes the most important Spanish painter.
Yes.
Wow.
And that's why he wrote his last book, autobiography, because like him, he left Crete, he became a cosmopolitan. Don't forget that the Greek word cosmopolitan means the whole world is a polis,
City.
a city.
World
It's a
city.
city. Doesn't mean that you don't belong anywhere. I belong to the world because the world is my city. And that's why the last book he wrote, I think his masterpiece, even if I may say, it's a blasphemy what I'm going to say, even better than Zorba, is his autobiography, because he essentially sends a letter to El Greco, how I grew up, what happened to my life, how I wrote Zorba, how I wrote this, how I wrote that, how Zorba, Odyssey in particular, his great poem, and how I became what I am today, which is an amazing reflection. If you start reading it, I had a German colleague at the University of Sydney who used to tell me, I've never managed to finish that book because I find it so overwhelming. I was so overwhelmed by the imagery, the discussions, the truth of the whole thing that I never managed to finish it.
Wow.
Yeah. I did read an article where he did write a letter to El Greco, and in the article it talked about the Ottomans in in Crete, who his father made Nico go into the main square where there was certain Cretans who were hung where their tongues were hanging out of their mouth, and he made them, I don't know, I think I read one article said where he made them kiss their feet or acknowledge them for what they did for the liberation of Crete. And it really changed his life. He was only a young boy. It's a picture
He's
of
only
9 years old.
9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you
And he
remember
has
this?
another story in Report to Greco. Then, when we had the revolution in Crete for the liberation of Crete from the Ottomans come in, the irregulars to massacre the population, and of course abduct the girls, the women, and kill the men. So his father was behind the door, holding the door, and then he had one gun against the head of the child, another one against the head of his daughter. So the moment they come in, I will kill you both. And at the moment that the Ottomans, the irregular Muslims left, so he said, now he went out and, killed one of them. He took the sword, the yataghan, and gave it to him and said, take it to sharpen your pencils.
Wow.
So you can imagine, I'm talking about 9 years old child,
So-
just what
Sure.
you're going through. The whole thing.
So this is the person that wrote Zorba the Greek. So it's great context of what was going on in his life and in his mind at that time, what he
Unbelievable.
experienced. So then he met this unusual character called Yorgos Zorbas,
Yeah.
which he lived a full life, I understand. He died at 75 and he ended up being buried in Skopje, I think we said. I think there's a monument of him in there. His great-grandson was a rock star in modern Greek music as well. But however, this relationship with Yorgos Zorbas ended up in this book. So how accurate is this book compared to Zorba's life and his relationship
Good
You know,
question.
he met with Mickey as well. His son. You know,
Did he
was
really?
his son. Yeah.
Rock star.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think the only rock opera that Theodorakis composed, Ilios και Petra, you know,
The Sun and the Rock.
the Sun Rock.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
just he performed it.
Yes.
You know, because he was a rock star. A writer must take poetic license to reinvent the past, all right? First of all, we see in the book the relocation of the story from Mani to Crete.
It's not intended as a history.
No.
Yeah.
It's a reconstruction of his memories.
Sure.
Memories, as you understand, is something else from actually writing history. You don't write history, you write something else. And then I believe that many people, there's a whole book on this by Yorgos Anapliotis, but the real Zorba, as he says, which I believe it's a bit of a sort of a kind of, how can I say that? They try to bring down this image of Zorba as a quirky character.
But he was definitely inspired by Zorba, his philosophy on life, because Nico grew up with books, reading, intellectual.
But if you read the book, sorry for interrupting, if you read the
Sure.
book, it's full of references to writers that Zorba would have never known.
Okay, sure.
Marcus Aurelius,
Wow.
the Stoic philosopher. Mallarmé, you know, the famous symbolist from France. Paul Valéry. He makes references to Sophocles. He makes references, let alone to Buddha. You know, half of this is about Buddha. And of course, you know, the book of all books for Kazantzakis, Divine Comedy by Dante. He says, I mean, he starts one of the books, and the chapters of the book says that I must read some verses from Dante's Divine Comedy so that I can have some rhythm in my daily life.
That's how the book starts.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
a cafe in Barea.
Yeah, but so this is what happened. The book is a very complex document dedicated to the memory of Zorba, not to the history of Zorba, because history, yeah, it's a completely. He's not a historian. He doesn't want to write an accurate transcription of what.
Just his relationships, his thought process, and his
And what he,
conversation.
as you said, what he actually ignited him to think about life.
Imagine
was
how
gonna say,
inspiring
yeah.
that individual must have been.
Exactly. That's what it was. It was an inspiration to say, wow, how would life be if there was somebody that did this?
Yeah.
And that's what he wrote. But the movie, more so than the book, is simpler. It's just about that. More so than the book, which is, as Vrasidas has said, is much more convoluted, and a book within a book within a book. The movie's fairly easy to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was younger, since you said that, you know, just when I was younger, I wrote a scathing critique of the movie.
Yeah. Because
But
it
it's
wasn't as deep.
It's
And,
disconnected. You don't understand how the one goes to the other. It's episodes. He took episodes from the book.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
always the case. It's never the same. So when you read the book and you watch the movie, you're always disappointed with the movie.
But
'cause
if you watch the film without reading the book, it's self-sufficient.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I
you don't know
saw
what
it
you're
before I
missing
read
out
the
on.
book.
The disappointing part for me, because obviously I saw the film first
Same.
and then read the book. Everyone has the gateway, which is usually the film. I found it disappointing to see that there was so much richness lost in the film depiction. There are key characters that are missing from that film, like Uncle Anagnosti, for example, who I just felt as though he was the Yoda of that story. You know, this old wise man who is imparting his, you know, to some degree village, but still quite worldly knowledge to
Village
these
philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. He's absolutely unbelievable, and he's nowhere in the story. And that's just one example.
there's only so much you can put in.
Movies
the
are
movie.
hard because as soon as you make it much more than 90 minutes or 120 minutes,
You lose your audience.
people say, oh, it's good, but it was long.
Unless it's Angelopoulos.
Yes, true.
If I may say to that what you say, you have to choose episodes that are crucial for the story itself. And this is exactly what he did. I mean, something that we pay less attention is that funny character, Mimithos.
Yes.
The Kouzulos to Horiou, the madman of the village, which is an amazing character in the whole film.
Played
He's
by
the only-
Sotiris Moustakas in the
which
film.
is Sotiris Moustakas, which is like sort of the court jester in King Lear.
Yes.
And if I can change cultures, talking about difference between movies and books, you might have read a book called Mao's Last Answer by Li Chun-sin.
Yes,
It's a
fantastic
fabulous book. It's long. It's, I don't know, 500 pages. I can't remember.
That was quite true to the text.
See, here's the thing, though. I was involved in the movie, if I may big note myself, and I was thinking, as I'm making the movie, how on earth are they going to put everything in?
Yeah.
And the director happens to be a great friend of mine, and I asked him, how are you going to put all of this? Well, he didn't. He couldn't.
Yeah.
The movie would still be going, or you'd have to have 3 parts. So if it's going to be one movie, the book starts with his mother, how Chinese ladies had to wear small shoes to make their feet small because that was more attractive, etc. I mean, that's not in the movie.
Yeah.
If he put that in, then he'd have to take something else out of the
course.
book. So going back to Zorba, the same, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
And also with the movie, you can't tell what they're thinking, but you can read it in the book.
Yep.
You can tell what they're thinking at the time, how they're feeling at the time. But in the movie, you've sort of got to try and work it out, but you can't actually...
But the great thing about the movie is the performances.
Yeah.
We talked about Anthony Quinn, great actor.
The scenery.
And
the music.
The music.
Yeah.
I know.
Also,
the book doesn't have the music.
if I may say, because what he tried to do, Kakoyannis, is to structure this as a Greek tragedy. And the music at the end is the catharsis, the cathartic dance that brings everything out, that gives a closure to everything.
Yeah.
And that's why, if you notice, there are 5 episodes, main episodes, like the 5 acts that we have in ancient Greek tragedy, that can evolve.
Can you explain that? Go through that. Because, again, a lot of our listeners probably wouldn't have heard
Just a quick summary of what those 5 acts would be.
Yeah.
Well, it's a story of the Zorba, of the writer tried to go to Crete, and then Zorba, and then is the story of Madame Hortense, is the story of the young boy who commits suicide because he can have, and the widow. There are 5 essentially central stories which evolve, and in the end come together with this strange scene with everything collapses, which is funny, which is a parody, which is a farce, which is all of the above at the same time. And then you have the dance, which brings everything into this cathartic consummation that we see in the film there. That what Kazantzakis said, don't forget the ancient Greek tragedy.
Does it bring everything together, or does it make you numb or see life in a different way?
I think that's
very
consummates.
complex.
Don't forget the ancient Greeks, tragic poets, had 3 tragedies and 1 comedy in order to give the comic relief at the end.
Okay,
when the British character, when Alan Bates's character says, to me, the most significant thing is when he says, "Teach me to dance," to Zorba, because that says, "Teach me life."
Yeah.
I don't want to be the stuck-up, etc. that I was before. I want to be alive.
Yes. And that brings us neatly into... I wanted to share this quote because it's another quote from the movie attributed to Zorba. "Boss, you've got everything. Looks, brains, but you need a little madness." Now, let me ask you, Vrasidas. And I want you to say whether I would do well in one of your course's essays. But everyone has their opinions on what the message and the themes of the text really are, and what they're trying to say. I feel that it's an exploration on the meaning of life and the constant struggle between that Apollonian and Dionysian, the Dionysian sides of all of us. Is that a fair take on it, or is it much deeper than that even?
Well, I think it's the key. I always have a metaphor about the text by Kazantzakis. He's from Crete. It's a labyrinth.
Right.
You have to go in, but you have to find the thread, Ariadne's thread, to get out of there.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're lost. I think that's why Kazantzakis is the most successful modern Greek writer. We have a discussion at the moment in Greece why people do not read Greek literature. Modern Greek literature. And the answer is because they read Kazantzakis. And international readers,
Sure.
But why? Because, as you said, Kazantzakis was able to address issues that were not only Greek but universal. And one of the most important things of Greek music, of Greek tragedy, of Greek writing is its universality. If it's not universal, it's provincial.
Mm-hmm.
And the Kazantzakis, they avoided provincialism and created this incredible, especially, as I said in the book, but in the film as well, because that's what the music actually did. The music is appropriate. I've heard this music being used in Japan, used in China, used everywhere, because it becomes a sort of a kind of a state of mind, a statement of euphoria. And don't forget that after our culture is full of, if I may use a German term, Weltschmerz, melancholic, we have this cosmic, sadness and sorrow that permeates. This is the ultimate antidote, don't you think?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Wow, I couldn't put it
that
way, though.
That's unbelievable.
At the moment, you mentioned, Nick, before the Rieu. Did you see how everybody gets up and starts dancing?
And they're alive again. You're right.
It's unbelievable what that music does to people.
Yeah, because it starts, as you said, slowly. So builds up, and suddenly, this is the impact of music, and you know better than me about this. Just the impact of music is that it essentially energizes your full brain and makes you wham. Now let's whap, and your body follows. And I've seen that Rieu as well in London. What's the name of the Carnegie Hall in London?
Covent Garden.
Covent Garden.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
It's the Anglos who never get up to dance, just except they hear, Kylie Minogue.
Well, neighbours just close, so that's topical. One other thing about the music, if I may, because I've done it many times, is that especially when it gets to the fast part, every phrase is played twice. Every phrase is repeated. You get a statement, that statement happens again. You get another statement, the statement happens again. Everyone is repeated. And that gives a real sense of satisfaction. When you hear something once and you like it, you want to hear it a second time.
Right.
Theodorakis knew this. I mean, he was a master philosopher. He knew this. He said, that's a good theme. Yeah, I'll go on to, hang on, before I go on to the next theme, I'll repeat that theme. Wow. And that happens all the way through to the end. And that's why it's so satisfying.
What a great point.
Unbelievable.
It's fantastic.
What do you reckon, Nick?
Oh, my God.
Whole new perspective on this, isn't it?
Look, as you know, I'm very structured.
Yep.
I'm very left side of the brain. You're very artistic. We've talked about Kazantzakis. We're starting to talk about the book, the themes of the book. Eventually, I want to talk about the music and the dance and all that sort of stuff. But look, back to the book. What are your main themes? We'll get to the music in a sec. Just what's your view on life? And who's right? Because they've both got two different points of view in the book.
I mean, different but complementary. The one complements the other. I mean, you cannot be happy without having known unhappiness.
Great point.
You cannot be free without having known unfreedom, the lack of freedom. I think the book is about freedom, and that was the main theme of Kazantzakis' work from the beginning to the end. How people become free. From convention, from inhibitions, from pressure, from culture, from society, from ideology, from religion, from everything. And how
he does mention in chapter 2 about being passionate. Is that a form of freedom? Or?
For him, passion leads. That was my point. Leads to freedom. You have passions in traditional moral theory have been expressed as something that distracts you from what you want to do. But you have to follow your passions, to become authentic to yourself. I think the book is about authenticity of the individual.
Beautiful.
And how this authenticity can lead you to freedom. It's a theme that later on, something which is very interesting to see, that Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre and all the existentialists, the French existentialists, have borrowed from Kazantzakis, but very few people actually admit or recognize that this is because of Kazantzakis' books, especially Zorba. And Zorba created a whole style of writing about these kind of things. How do I become free? How do I free myself from inhibitions and the fears and the panics that my society has instilled in me? And I have internalized them, and they are part of myself. Kazantzakis is amazing about this, how he describes that. I think the whole book is about freedom, the main thing, the authenticity of freedom, and that happens through this messy process of confronting your own fears. This is what happens with the Anglo Alan Bates, the boss. You know, it's very interesting that it doesn't have a name in the film. Boss.
That's right.
It's the boss. It's the boss. I mean, this
As
becomes...
a side note, is that Nikos Kazantzakis, the boss? Or is it
Yeah,
part
the
of his
boss.
character?
He is Kazantzakis is the boss in
He's
the
the
book.
boss, yeah.
But the boss means, as you understand, an impersonal entity. Doesn't have but in the end he becomes himself by taking off his jacket
Yeah.
and starts dancing. So it's the passion that takes over the rational part of himself, the idea that I'm controlled by if I may use Freudian terms, by the superego of my society, and then suddenly it's me, a person I love. That's why he says, let me tell you something, Zorba, you are one of the very few people that I loved in my life. You're the only person that truly loved in my life. And then, as you see, Kazantzakis' most rare word is the word love, agape. He uses this, just in the most critical and crucial moments of the book. Actually, twice he uses it in the book.
Is that right? Only twice.
Twice.
Wow.
The word agape, agapo,
yeah.
Because agape for him is an amazing feeling of surrender, of opening up.
Wow, when you use that word. Wow.
Yeah, that's why he says at the end, and I think that Kakoyannis kept that one. Let me tell you something, Zorba. Remember in the dance? Yes. You're the only man that I ever loved in my life, which means, today the word love is a pop song by Shakira
That's true.
and what's the name of the other one? Beyonce. But in this context means total and absolute, if I may say, demolition of the defenses that you have about yourself, in in front of the mystery of another individual. And that happens during the dance. And I think the dance helps. Don't you think that the music helps this denudation of the individual, who become naked suddenly?
Absolutely, that's exactly what it's about. It's about wild abandon, feeling that you're not grounded, you want to walk on air.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Unbelievable.
Look, I've moved into the 21st century. I actually didn't read the book. I listened to the book. I did the audio process. My first audio book, actually, thanks to you, Tom.
No worries.
You recommend that to me.
He said an audiobook.
There is.
It is. Yeah, I bought it on Amazon on one of them, and my morning walks, I've been listening to it. It's fantastic.
Nice. Great.
Yeah, I can't sit on a bed and read. My back plays up and so. But anyway,
it's one of those things. As a kid, you love being read to, and as an adult now with these audiobooks,
you're right.
You're getting that experience again. It's fantastic.
I've heard people love it. I haven't tried it yet. I'm sure I'll get hooked
It's
on
brilliant.
it if I do.
You can do two things at once. I walk in the morning and I get exercise, and I ride my bike at lunchtimes and I listen to it. It's fantastic.
This is how, for the first time in my life, I understood Ulysses by James Joyce, by listening to the book.
There you go.
Because it's an oral text.
Yeah, right.
But in these books, I must have a pen and pencil and underline. My God.
Yes.
It's funny you say that, because as I was walking, I would stop and get onto my iPhone and type into my notes, which brings me to my next quote. In chapter 3, there was something really fascinating, and I really wanted to ask you about this, where the old grandpa, 90-year-old, planting an almond tree. And he said, my son, I carry on as if I shall never die. And Zorba responded, I carry on as if I was going to die in the next minute. Who's right in that scenario? Is it the same thing? That really made me think about that for the next 20 minutes. I had to pause.
That's probably the point.
That is to say, I think...
How do you live life?
How do you live? By being responsible every moment of your life. This is what he's trying to say.
But do I live for... This is my last minute on Earth?
Yeah. What
do
would
I
you
go
do?
out and party and do whatever?
What would you do if you knew that this is the last minute of your life? What do you mean do before that? Kazantzakis says that you have to act responsibly always, as if your life, the next moment will be your last, or as if the next moment will be your first as well.
So do I look forward to the next
good.
morning, or do I just, this is my last night on Earth?
This is your last night on Earth. You have to think seriously about this. I mean, what would I do if I knew that my life... Don't forget that one of the greatest moments, I was talking about that yesterday with a friend of mine, moments of Greek tragedy, is that Prometheus, who is up in the Caucasus, punished by the gods, says, "What's the first benefit that he gave to human beings?" And he said, "The first thing I had to do, not to give them fire, as usually the stories, I made them forget the day they're going to die." And how did you do that, he says? By putting in their mind the hollow hope that they will live forever. So Kazantzakis continues this incredible discussion that essentially we must act every day, every moment, as if it's our last moment and there will be no tomorrow. And as if be our first moment, because you reinvent yourself as well.
Is this a unique concept? I can't think of other texts that talk, that are similar in that respect. Have other cultures or other writers, other than philosophers, written about something like this?
Well, I think that there's some, probably in Christianity, in Buddhism, and Stoicism in particular. Kazantzakis was a great Stoic philosopher. I mean, Stoicism is the philosophy of the 20th, post-war 20th century and 21st century. And actually, I believe that as we go on, we will discover how important Stoicism was. Especially, I strongly recommend this book by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius called To Myself.
He's
Confession.
in my audiobooks too, by the way.
You have to read it.
Listen to.
And actually, Kazantzakis has this incredible line from and Marcus Aurelius wrote it in Greek, as you remember. It's in a great text written in Greek. And he has this incredible line.
And he plays the character in Gladiator.
I didn't want to mention that, but I just
It's one of my favourite films.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Go Russell Crowe.
But Kazantzakis uses from that book the famous line. It says, "What is giving you happiness in life?" It says, "Lying on the beach at night and look at the stars as if you are revolving with them."
Wow, what a comment.
What an amazing line, as you understand.
So we used to do that at camping. We sit at the campfire down the south coast, no music, no nothing, just look up at the skies. And now and then we'd see a shooting star, but we could see the stars revolving.
It's a wonderful thing in life to do, to look up at the stars, especially when you're not near the city.
Yeah.
It's just one of the most joyous experiences I've ever felt.
It reminds me of the Theodorakis' last symphonies as well, which is one of the symphonies of the stars and these kind of things. And it's amazing, as in to see how, this, if I may say, Greek spirits communicate with each other. And I think it's, if we try to find something unique in the Hellenic tradition, the Hellenism, is this precisely this idea that there's no harmony with you. You are tuning yourself to the cosmic harmony.
That's very profound.
Fantastic. Now, look, I want to look at a couple of scenes from the film. There are two scenes that I sort of struggle to reconcile, and they surround the deaths of Madame Hortense and the widow. The actions, behaviours and demeanour of the village surrounding the deaths of those two women are difficult to comprehend for me personally and for many. The way everyone begins ransacking Hortense's home before she's even taken her final breath, and the honour-killing style execution of the widow. Was that written to be taken on face value? Was that the reality of living in a Cretan village at that time, or is there something deeper going on in these actions?
The film is set in the beginning of the 20th century, right? 1917 and these kind of things. And the book as well. Kazantzakis wanted to avoid idealization and romanticization of the past. These things were happening, especially, let's go to Madame Hortense, especially people who were not Orthodox, baptized Orthodox.
Right.
They were not allowed to be buried, first of all. They had to be buried outside the cemeteries of the baptized Orthodox people in the area. So it was a very cruel sort of a life and cruel death that these people had to face, who lived in Greece. The same happened in other countries as well, for Orthodox people in Italy.
So even by cruel, it's the after death.
After death, because they didn't have any rights. They didn't have any, death is a very important social ritual in these small communities.
Okay, so they're respected, I guess, in the community. They were part of the community, but when they died,
They're nothing.
their rights changed.
They don't exist.
Okay.
Actually, if you see, Madame Hortense doesn't have any rights when she's alive as well. She's under the predatory eyes of everybody.
Yes. She's an outsider.
An outsider and, if I may say, a legal alien. She doesn't have an identity. And actually, as a matter of fact, she's a real character. Eh? She existed.
Oh, right.
Really?
Before the liberation of Crete from the Ottomans in 1899, which Crete for 14 years became an independent state.
Okay. Wow.
Until 1914, she became part of Greece. It was annexed by Greece.
Their own country for 14 years.
14 years, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
If you see, Kazantzakis dedicates his book, The Last Temptation of Christ, to Prince George of Greece, who became the first High Commissioner of Crete as an independent state.
Right.
And he says that the greatest moment of his life is when Prince George came. He is the brother of Prince Philip's father. You know, all these royals are interconnected, as you see, just incestuous because of the incestuous bonds. And Kazantzakis dedicates that book and to Marie Bonaparte. Marie Bonaparte is, I don't know if you know Marie Bonaparte, but Marie Bonaparte was one of the Greek princesses of King George, who was the wife of Prince George, who became the High Commissioner on Crete. And she's the most famous.
Napoleon?
She's
Bonaparte?
Her husband was called Bonaparte. She's the most famous psychoanalyst, one of the most important psychoanalysts of Europe, the one who saved Freud from Hitler later on.
Okay.
Wow.
When Hitler entered Vienna in 1936-37, he wanted to kill Freud. And she had the guts and the strength and the courage to go in front of Hitler and said, you have to liberate Freud, because otherwise I'll turn the whole royal families of Europe against you. Wow, so Marie Bonaparte took Freud out of Vienna and saved him to London. So these are the stories there. So I think legal aliens back then were very sort of they didn't really exist in the village. The village was essentially like Madame Hortense. She had a brothel for the four navies that were there to defend Crete from the Ottomans, the Russians, the English, the Italians, and the French. Don't forget that she has a parrot which constantly calls out the name Cannavaro, who is the Admiral Cannavaro. Cannavaro was her lover back then. But when the fleets left, she was left behind. So there's a real life there. Yeah, and that was her end as a woman. She was buried. I don't think you can find a grave today because she was buried in an unmarked grave outside the village cemetery. Wow. So it was tragic back then, as you understand, because for religious schism, don't forget that the schism between East and West, between the Orthodox and the Catholics, ended in 1966 for the first time.
Right.
So until then, they didn't have the right to be buried with the normal religious rites. So she had that one. And as such, the male-centered society of these villages could do whatever they wanted with legal aliens, especially women, and, to go to the next question, widows.
Right.
Right.
Widows, that you say women who were married, didn't have children, but they lost their husbands, considered by this, if I may say, androcentric societies as prostitutes, that they could be used by youngsters to be initiated to sex.
Right.
It was a very common practice in Sicily, in Greece, in
Is that right?
the islands, in Crete and these islands as well. Yeah, very common practice back then. So I think Kazantzakis didn't want to idealize the past. He wanted to give you, this is what was happening. I mean, Zorba is good, the boss is good, the village is nice, the people are friendly, the fool of the village is great, but there's a dark side of the whole thing. It's the dark Greece, as you understand, that you see there.
Yeah. Is that why widows try to marry quickly for a second time?
Quickly. And as you see, widows, if I may use the term, were damaged goods.
And in Zorba, the book, she's ostracized because she doesn't want to remarry.
Yes.
And you see in the movie, the most subtle, gentle, and intimate scene, the most intimate scene, is when the boss gives you an umbrella.
Yeah.
It's an amazing scene. I think for those who look at the film, from this artistic point of view, that's the most beautiful scene. That
Very
you
touching.
see.
Yeah.
Yet suddenly, she's the only one who shows kindness and empathy to her. All right, the others, just are predators. And he simply opens the umbrella for her under the...
Wow.
And the way that Irene Pappas looks at him, confused, who are you to do that to me? And with gratitude at the same time.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a lovely duality.
It's an incredible scene, that one.
So that was the scene when she lost her goat and it went into the
Yeah.
cafe.
And then she goes out. He opens the umbrella for her. That's why Zorba says all these men who are more masculine, alpha males than him, cannot have this woman. Only you can have it. Because you showed her empathy.
Wow. Because all the men in the cafe did want her.
Yeah.
And one in particular wanted to marry her.
Yeah.
Wow. And she was beautiful.
She was amazing.
Oh
I'm
my
not saying
God,
beautiful. That representation of Irene Pappas, of that widow, is the ultimate, a Greek statue, essentially.
Yeah, Greek goddess. And,
Yeah.
the women hated her in the village. The men all wanted her.
And the widow is always a story, if you read the other stories by Kazantzakis, like Christ Crucified, it's always the Mary Magdalene of the village.
Yeah.
Great analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why when in Christ Crucified, if you remember the story of Kazantzakis, I think his best novel as a novel, this Zorba the Greek, as he calls it, this is a Platonic dialogue. That's what Kazantzakis thought about this.
Was the depiction of the widow and her ultimate demise portrayed to some extent as a justification? Is there an understanding that what happened to her was unjust, given that the male members of the village were egging the young boy who wanted her on?
Well, the answer is given by the village fool. Murderers, dolophoni, fognades, he says, murderers, because as you understand, behind all this beautiful facade, there was a dark aspect, also as depicted by Kazantzakis, the dark aspect of masculinity, violence, predatory behavior, and then finally, as you see, the death. And Kazantzakis in the book has an amazing chapter afterwards, which is not included in the novel, in the film. How the same people who killed her go to her grave and put flowers on the grave.
Yeah.
That's an interesting
Very
contradiction.
Hypocritical there, isn't it?
Oh, critical! Yeah, the Cretans didn't like that at all. Actually, I have to tell you that the film is not very popular on Crete.
Is that right?
Yeah, not very popular on Crete. It's popular on the Greek mainland, but not on Crete. Crete they consider that.
Let's just go for a moment. Let's break the film out of its context. Someone new watching that film today. Obviously, we live in a society where there's a lot of revisionism happening. Does a scene like that stand up today? Could it survive today?
Well, you are the young person, For me, anything goes. As you understand, as long as it's well and aesthetically presented. So, what do you think?
I think the theme rings true today. The theme is human emotions are human emotions. I don't think human emotions differently now than we did in the 17th century. Not that I lived then, but you know what I mean. I can only relate to composers, but Mozart and Beethoven and Stravinsky, I'm sure, felt the same things that we feel. If this repressed British writer is feeling repressed, that's not unique to 1917 or when was it set? 1917.
15, 17.
That's true now. A person who wants to liberate themselves and be free and wild abandon is not unique to any specific era.
Yeah. The reason I asked the question is because we live in a world now where there was a movement recently in the US where they were trying to ban teaching the Odyssey and the Iliad.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
On the grounds of violence and looking at it through that sort of prism.
Yeah, I think that these are very superficial readings of the text.
Yes.
And the superficial readings because essentially, if I may say, the widow in the film is not simply the widow of the book. It's not simply a widow. As writers, we have our desires within ourselves. Kazantzakis always had to confront his own femininity. This character is also a projection of his feminine urges, as you understand, which he had to kill because he wanted to be a man. So it's an inner conflict in Kazantzakis. All these female characters that he has in his films, in his novels, are about him as a woman, try to confront his own duality, as you said.
Wow. Okay.
You can see that.
I didn't expect this to go there.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
very interesting.
Very profound, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you read his book, Freedom or Death, or Kapitan Michalis, he has this incredible scene, all right? There's this woman from Kyrgyzstan, she's abducted by this incredible alpha male Cretan, who's going to rape her. But the moment she appears in front of him, the Cretan man starts being afraid, becomes dominated by her. And Kazantzakis describes her as a tigress that was going up to him and says, "What are you going to do now?" She says, totally dominated by her at the end in the film. Kazantzakis had an ambivalent relationship with women. I mean, he had an affair with this incredible philosopher, Eli Labridi, who appears in the book, in the book, not in the film, as him and Stavridakis, his friend, send letters to her, a woman that we called our Despina, our dominator. She's a Despina, and then we loved her, and we're up in Egendin, very interesting, with a place where Nietzsche lived as well. They have all these subtexts, as you see there, they appear, right? Sure. And he felt really, how can I say, offended or traumatized or whatever you could like to call it, because she chose his friend, not him. So he had a lot of things to say about that.
Such a complex character, Kazantzakis. Unbelievable.
I mean, there's a film recently that came out, if you remember, by Smaragdis, Kazantzakis. Don't watch it. It is an operetta on Kazantzakis. It's a magisterial misinterpretation of his existence.
So listeners, don't watch that film.
No, watch the film as a fantasy work.
Yeah. So the original book was written in French, as you said, and it got translated. However, the translation didn't translate the whole of the book. And there's lots of bits of the original.
The translation to English, you mean?
Yeah, the original piece wasn't translated to English. No. And I understand now that the full translation is out there. What bits have been added and missing? I understand you're holding a book there.
Yeah, it came out in... Just a second, because I can't see anything anymore.
The glasses have come on.
Exactly.
Do you need a top up there, George?
Yes, he
came
does.
out.
I do need, but I won't, because...
You want half?
Oh, God.
There
aren't any RBTs
pressure
around, are there?
In 2014. In 2014.
2014.
Okay. Nearly.
Well, I top up, George, with...
Which is the first complete translation of the text.
Okay.
Right.
Which and the most important part of this is that it includes the introduction by Kazantzakis, where Kazantzakis explains what he's trying to do with this one, and especially at the end, which says that. Sorry, the afterword here, which talks about.
Got to say, you look very much like Dmitri Shostakovich with those glasses. A mixture of Shostakovich and John Lennon.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Well, actually, it says, one day I sat down on the flat roof of my home by Aegina, the island, seashore. It was midday, lots of sunshine, and across the way I viewed the charmingly naked loins of Salamis, the island. Suddenly, while having this at all in my mind, I took a piece of paper, lay down on the roof's fiery flagstones, and began to write the saint's life of Zorba.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful? I wrote quickly, eagerly, impatiently, reviving the past by attempting to remember and preserve Zorba in his entirety. It seemed that if he disappeared, the fault will be entirely mine. I worked day and night to solidify the features to the core, the features of my spiritual father. I worked, and that's what I wanted to read. I worked like the witch doctors of savage tribes of Africa. who make cave drawings of an ancestor they have viewed in a dream, striving to depict him as accurately as possible so that the soul will be able to recognize its body and re-enter it.
I mean, that just answers the question that you answered earlier, Nick.
You know, isn't it amazing?
That floors me.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, you feel goosebumps.
Oh
you
my
know,
God, I feel like I'm in another world.
Isn't it amazing how he himself saw that recreation, his relation with Zorba, my spiritual father, and then like the tribes of Africa, they paint what they have seen in their dream, but the dream is so real that they will come out through the painting to be united with the image itself. Amazing.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I mean, this is what is missing from the play, or the movie, as you understand, right? That incredible background.
Sure. And then that was the addition to that wasn't translated into English.
No.
Is there any more? That was like, I'm going to have a shot of Tick with the Elf.
I think you need a couple.
There is more, but you have to read it by yourself. I think.
So that's the 2014 edition.
2014, the new edition by Peter Bean. The other one by Chris Whiteley, I think, 1956. But this one is the complete edition of the book. It has all these incredible details, as you see, sort of a kind of because it finishes, very interesting that the day he finished the book, a letter comes about the death of Zorba. And as you see, he brings together memory and reality all in one.
Unbelievable.
It's a very complex book, as you understand. But at the same time, it's like, as he said, this is Kazantzakis' statement, a Platonic dialogue. It starts like Plato's Republic. If you have read Plato's Republic, it starts with a famous line, yesterday went down to Piraeus, where I met this and this and this. This is how it starts. Yesterday I went down to Piraeus to take the boat and then I met this and this and this.
Wow.
It's an incredible Platonic dialogue, like Plato and a student trying to find what is truth, what is beauty, what is reality, what is self.
Sorry, would he have done that consciously, do you think?
Yeah, because Kazantzakis was extremely well-read. Yeah. He had translated in his youth 6 Platonic dialogues into modern Greek. I think that's why this book is so successful, as I said. In Harold Bloom, in the Western Canon, in the book that he wrote, the Western Canon, is the only book that he includes from modern Greek literature. Just this one, as probably one of the best novels written in the last 400 years. And I strongly recommend the book, to read it wherever you have the opportunity, because it's such a multi-layered book, just suddenly. I mean, when you talk about the death of the widow, right? And he has this incredible chapter. It starts, the widow was killed, but now she was looking at them from eternity with a smile, and said to them, you will die, I will oversee you until your death, the end of your life. It has this incredible, just dreamlike, visionary element that comes there throughout the book. Just, my God, wow. Go, Nico.
Digressing a bit here, but it reminds you of a tomb I saw in Ipiro, so where my parents or my dad was born. And I stood there for ages and I read it. It was in Greek, but I'll translate it in English. It was, "Hey, you there, stranger, staring at my tomb. I was where you were standing, and you will be where I am." Something like along those lines. But it was in Greek. I took a photo of it. And it was, and just reminded of what you just said. It's just fascinating the way the Greeks thought back then of life. And this guy had this on his tomb. Blew me away.
I don't know if we can top that now.
Well, I think that, most people have to deal, in Australia as well, people...
Actually, I must say that was in a town called Plakoti in Ipiro, where a lot of my first cousins are from. So,
right. Yeah.
So cheers to the people of Plakoti.
Ipirus is the place, as you said, death had found its most artistic expression through your Myrologia. Just the Myrologia is amazing from Ipirus,
and
right?
that river... Archerondas River,
yeah,
where you have to pay the
Dodoni.
ferryman.
And Dodoni, you
Cheese.
don't forget Dodoni, the
cheese.
place.
Yeah.
Not Dodoni cheese,
The place where the cheese is from.
which is the best, by the way.
Great
cheese,
cheese.
feta
Love
cheese,
Dodoni
right?
cheese.
Yes, it is.
The best cheese is Karalis feta. You know, nothing to do with me. But
Good surname.
Another debate.
Dodoni is the most ancient place of sacred presence in Greece. It's the first prayer that we have in Homer. O Zeph, Anax, Dodone, Pelasgike. O Zeph, King Zeus, from Dodoni.
Wow.
Pre-Hellenic.
Wow.
It's the most important prayer that we have in the Iliad. Then
Wow.
just
Because I remember the Acheronda River. They've got a beautiful cafe there amongst this river, and the water is freezing. It's like mountain ice.
the entrance
water.
to the underworld.
That's right. And I think Mick Jagger wrote. Was it Mick Jagger? You have to pay the ferryman.
Who pays the ferryman?
That's right.
Yeah.
It was come from that. And my father's auntie that passed away, when they buried her, they actually put coins on her eyes.
Yeah, Michael Oldfield.
And that's
not Mike Jagger, Michael Oldfield.
Michael Oldfield, is that
Tubular
what it was?
bells, yeah.
Was
The
it
one
David Bowie?
No, Michael Oldfield.
Oldfield, okay.
Tubular bells.
Paying the ferryman. So back then, when people died, you had to pay the ferryman to take it to the afterlife, which is along the Acheronda River.
To this day, they do it in Greece.
And they still do, yeah.
Yeah,
And
now
my
my-
ancestors were buried with coins. They had to put a coin
When
on.
my mother died a few years ago, his sister, because only women can do that in Greece, not men, opened her mouth and put a 1 drachma on her tongue to pay the ferryman.
Gee.
to take it to the afterlife.
There's a lovely instrumental piece by Markopoulos called "Who Pays the Ferryman."
Who pays the ferryman?
It's,
Yeah.
it's a well
There
known
you go.
tune. Beautiful.
Unbelievable.
Wow. We have digressed a bit. However, I've got one last question. I'm sure we've got a lot of questions, Tom, but the more we drink, the more questions we have. With Zorbas, the Zorbas in the book and the Zorbas that Nikos met, how is he to the modern day Greek? How do you compare him to the modern day Greek? In the book, it showed him as very masculine, but very empathetic. We talked about the deaths, he was there trying to save the widow from getting, I think she got stabbed in the square.
Well, she was stoned in the book, I think.
She was stoned and she got stabbed, I think, towards the end.
Not stabbed.
Oh, she
They
got,
split the
Had
throat.
a throat slit.
The boy's father, the boy who suicided, his father
Mavradoni.
slit
her throat.
yeah.
Yeah. So how is that character compared to the modern Greek today in 2022?
Well, you were visiting Greece. I'm not. What do you think, George, about this?
Well, I think the question really is, and I had a question along similar lines, is, do you think Zorba still is the standard of how Greeks or Greece is seen around the world? And why is that good or a problem? I mean, I remember probably about 10 or 12 years ago, Peter Economides, the brand marketing specialist, gave a talk called Rebranding Greece and spoke about how at the time Zorba was a problem, in the context of the economic crisis and, because he was the Dionysus, basically. Does that hold up today? Is Zorba a problem or is he a necessary element of our identity?
It's part of our identity, I think. Don't forget that the Greeks have a very pessimistic element as well, melancholic element in their character. We must not forget that the Greeks are not the simply exuberant people dancing in the streets, but they have a completely a complete other side of themselves, which is melancholy. Don't forget that melancholy is a Greek word, right? And they're very something extremely, extremely sad. The Greeks have a word for this, all right? I think it's called harmolipi, joy and sorrow at the same time. Harmolipi. All Greek music is about harmolipi. Right? Both sorrow and joy at the same time. And I think that Zorba is the element of that element, the chara, of the harmosinos, as we say in Greek, who actually points to lipi as well, to sadness and sorrow as well, because in reality he's a very sorrowful character in reality, right? It's a very romantic character, if you think.
He's everything.
Somebody who...
He's everything. He's empathetic,
Yeah.
he's romantic, he's a lover.
He's
mad.
Crude. Crude. He goes to the brothel and spends the money with this prostitute, the young prostitute.
The money that Alan Bates' character gave him.
Yeah, exactly. He's crude. He's all of the above. Well, Kazantzakis didn't try to create a pure type, as you understand. Don't forget, you obviously, as I see being born in an Anglo-Saxon world, you try to find Calvinist Puritanism everywhere. Human beings exist either good or bad, and they're good and bad, and the one fights against the other. In reality, goodness and badness exist within us, all right? The human soul is the human psyche, if I use a Greek word.
And that the acceptance of that is a very ancient Greek trait, isn't it? I mean,
from Homer.
Yeah,
from Homer. I mean, the greatest psychologist of the Greek psychology is the first writer, Homer. Homer gave you Achilles. Achilles is the main character of the Greeks to this day. Achilles is arrogant, defiant, and a souk at the same time. He's fighting, and then at the moment he sees that there's a danger, he disappears. He feels insulted, he feels ashamed, and this kind of things. But at the same time, he's brave and courageous, and he will get tenacious, and this kind of thing. But it's both of that. I mean, we have to accept that this idea that comes from, if I may say, Western Europe, that we are purely this or purely that, and you are purely good. John Wayne is always good, right? And the enemies are always bad, as you see. It just doesn't apply to this kind of characters. They are both at the same time, and at the same time, they're the inner demons and angels that fighting within them.
It's that yin and yang.
That's the
duality,
the Apollonian,
the duality that you talk about, the Apollonian Dionysian, but also the ancient Greeks. Don't forget that have this idea, right? That you have to achieve apathia, passionless, but through your passions. Kazantzakis believes that you must become apathia, apathies.
Apathetic.
But through your passions. You have to essentially exhaust your passions in order to achieve that thing.
That's unbelievable.
We're running out of Tsikwadiya.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself is unbelievable, that last statement there.
You're summing it up. So I guess before we move on to music, from reading the book, listening to the book, and listening to what Nikos Kazantzakis said about Zorbas and stuff, what is the meaning of life for a man?
For a human, you mean?
I guess for a human, for a human, I guess. So women and men might have different views of this.
I think Kazantzakis would have said is freedom.
So freedom.
Freedom. But then, what is freedom?
Exactly.
Freedom is, according to Kazantzakis, and I totally espouse actually, I always aspire to write like this in Greek, just in what the ancient Greeks actually believed that is harmony, balancing of this and that. You cannot be purely good, you cannot be purely bad, you have to balance the one against the other. The Greeks have an amazing word of that, on this, isoropia.
Yes.
Isoropia. Equal tendencies. Isoropos.
So you must have bad
balance
with the good.
With the good. I mean, what is bad is another story. What is bad in Greek is excess.
Metro.
Yeah, it's not evil, the evil element that the West usually recognizes as bad. For the Greeks, the element of good, of bad, of kakon, of the kakon, is excessive. Something that's excessive.
You have too much of something.
Of too something.
It's not good.
Don't forget that even the Christian word hamartia for sin.
You better stop the Tsikwadiya, Tom.
The Greek word for hamartia, which usually translate the Christian concept of hamartia, which translated into English as sin, means failure.
Right.
It doesn't mean seed. Sin is a Latin term which means crime. That when you fail, to do something, you're a criminal. For the Greeks, a good person can also be hamartolos, a sinner, because of the excessiveness of something that he will do.
Wow. That's
So relating that
sorry, go, George.
So relating that to music, harmony, basically it's chords. You're a guitarist, Tom. You play chords on the guitar. I mean, so if something, for example, is in G major is the tonic chord, and that's a chord of repose, because it's a tonic chord 1, we call it. There's 7. But in order for chord 1, it's going on with your harmony analogy. In order for chord 1 to feel like home, there has to be some tension for it to release to home. Yep. So the dominant chord has a chromatic tenseness or tension to it in order for that to be released. So what you're saying about harmony being good and bad, or this and that, the duality happens in music as well, and good composers, especially like Theodorakis, know this, and they use it superbly. Mozart, Mahler, they all used it.
Especially Mahler, I think,
very much
so.
All interconnected.
What we're trying to say is, so you need drama, you need controversy in your life to have balance.
You need intensity. First of all, you have to be passionate, as you said before.
Passionate, drama, you need controversy.
But then you'll be able, that's what Kazantzakis says, you'll be able to control yourself with this kind of things. Otherwise you enter the other famous Greek word, chaos, into chaos.
Yes.
The chaotic, imbalanced expression, of something. You see, you mentioned that before about the Genesis. The Genesis, it starts in Theodorakis, ding, 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 ding. It's the chaos of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Suddenly, ding.
Yep. It comes together.
Order.
Yes, exactly.
Suddenly comes order.
And isn't that what Zorba explores? What is life? I mean, you asked the question. I think the author asked the question first, and that is, what is life? How do we make sense of it? Do we follow our brain? Do we follow our heart? Do we explore wild abandon, or do we keep all our accounts in order? Or can we do both? Can we? That's the question. That's the interesting thing about Zorba.
If I may say, since you said that, John, what it means, Kazantzakis, is that this is what you have to do, but you have to do it with another person.
Right. Okay.
Balance is not personal, is relational.
Communal. Okay. Right. Interesting.
That's why he doesn't call this book My Life with Zorba. It was the life of Zorba. Somebody outside him. So balance, isoropia, is relational. You can have it only through another person and with another person. And I think that's a very important aspect of the book, as you understand, that essentially it says that it's a critique, philosophically speaking now, of Western individualism. Something that has not been stressed appropriately, I think. They think that's a glorification of individualism, but in reality the book is completely the opposite.
Yeah, right.
You have to be you can be an individual only through a relationship with another individual, whom he here calls my spiritual father, as you understand, or pneumatikos mu, as he say. Actually, he doesn't use pneumatikos in the original. He uses gerondas, my elder.
Right.
Which is a tradition goes back to Plato and then to Christianity, or gerodasmo. If you go to monasteries, the older monks are not called... They're called the gerodes.
Yes.
So that's exactly it. I mean, for him, individuality is relational. It's not because of me. It's not that, for example, great writers like Hermann Hesse, like Thomas Mann, like James Joyce, believe that the individual is something in itself and for itself.
Wow.
Nick, you look like you've been hit, mate. You didn't expect this to...
He's not the only one.
I love philosophy, as you know, Tommy. I love talking about this stuff. But really, that's just... How do you sum that up? I guess
you can't... I mean, this is what we were...
Music.
Talking
music
about.
Will solve the
we're going to get to music.
It is a very good way to go into the music, because so much of the emotion that comes out of the film, as we spoke about earlier, comes from the music. From what you know about Mikis Theodorakis' involvement in the film, do you know anything about the brief that he was given by Michael Kalkoyannis when it comes to developing it, or was he given virtually a free hand to write anything?
He was given a free hand.
Wow.
And he just... See, Mikis Theodorakis was an amazing... was very different in that... Unlike, his good friends and colleagues that I know of, and please correct me if I'm wrong about
George,
this.
we've got to cut you off there. You actually met him, so you're talking from first-hand experience by meeting Mikis Theodorakis.
Yes, I did get a chance to meet him, which was wonderful. It's the best 3 hours of my life. A meeting that was supposed to be 20 minutes became 30 minutes, and I 3 hours. And I can talk more about that at length. I could bore you silly about how lovely it was to meet him. But what I do know about Mikis Theodorakis, was that he was passionately Greek and also a world citizen. I mean, he was ousted from his own country, as we know. He studied in Paris, and he went to Chile, and he met Pablo Neruda, the Nobel Prize winner. And Theodorakis knew the world. He looked at everything from a world point of view, and yet related it very, very strongly, identifiably to Greece and to Greekness. These emotions and these themes that we're exploring in Zorba, or that the author explored in Zorba, are universal. They're not just Greek. Whether you're going to keep your accounts in order, or whether you're going to live with wild abandon, or anything else we've talked about today, are not uniquely Greek.
Sure.
Other countries,
it's a human thing.
People from Mexico might feel that. People from South Africa might feel that.
Because we talked about balance as well, and Vrasidas brought it up. It's the Chinese have this yin and yang. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
A lot of cultures have that.
So when he sits down to write music to this film, yes, Greek, yes, but also world point of view. And what is it that I'm going to do for this music? How do I make it so relatable to the movie, the music that it can be understood by everybody? Now, here in Australia, non-Greek Australians don't grow up with bouzouki.
Yep.
And yet, when they hear a piece of music like Zorba, the main theme, Zorba's dance, love it. People love it. Cat Stevens wrote a song called Ruby My Love, which is in the time signature of 7/8. So it's Akala Matianos.
Wow.
This British composer.
What does 7/8 mean? Can you just
7/8 normally music is mostly in 4/4, so there are 4 beats in the bar, and if you can divide those 4 beats, you get 8/8. You take one of those half beats away, you get 7/8. So instead of da 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 da, you get da 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 da, and that's Akala Matianos. And Ruby My Love is in 7/8. Very, very few, if any, pop songs from Britain, America, France, wherever you like, are in 7/8.
And it sounds like a Greek song. Like it's,
even sings Greek. He sings.
He does,
Lika, he says, sweetness.
Cat Stevens.
Yeah, Cat Stevens.
He's Greek, isn't he?
Yeah. It was
Cypriot, but
Cypriot,
Greek.
Yeah, it's Greek.
But he does speak. Yeah, he does sing in Greek on that song for a couple of verses.
And he had major hits with songs like Father and Son, and we know Cat Stevens, but he also had a hit with Ruby My Love, and Ruby My Love uses bouzouki. Now bouzouki is identifiably Greek, and of course Theodorakis uses bouzouki, and the main first note that you hear, other than the guitar introduction for 2 bars, is bouzouki.
Yeah.
Da-dum! That's bouzouki. That's just screams Greekness. He used bouzouki, especially in the main theme, Zorba's dance, and at the same time, especially for beautiful songs like The Full Catastrophe, or the music that underscored The Full Catastrophe, strings and orchestral, and so it's world. It's both this duality that we've been talking about all afternoon, this duality between Greekness and Greek and world and non-Greekness. The music is spectacularly brilliant because of that. Every emotion that we all feel about what all these characters are going through is perfectly underscored by Mikis Theodorakis. If you changed a note, I mean, we know about Mozart, and Mozart was sometimes criticised by his own bosses and colleagues. Change the music. He knew exactly what he was doing. He said, I'm not changing one single note. With Mikis Theodorakis, not that he ever said this, if you change a single bar of this main theme that we know, it would wreck it.
Actually, that's a great point, because when you hear people playing it live and they shorten it, or they truncate it in some way, it's not the same.
It's not as good.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You're right.
And there are many versions. I mean, it was a major hit in 1964 when it came out. People covered it from all over the world. It was never right. It was never as good. No cover of Zorba's dance, the Zorba's theme, is as good as what's in the movie.
Yeah. And many people have done it before. I've seen versions by like Jose Feliciano, for example. It's transcended all these cultures and all these musicians. But you're right, nobody's been able to get it, quite like that original version.
Yeah, that original version is the best. When we do it for our concerts, we keep it the same structure. We do add orchestral instruments, and that's the wonderful thing about it. A bassoon, for example, was not invented in Greece. A French horn, obviously, was not invented in Greece. However, we add these French horns and bassoons and violins and double basses and trombones, and it's a magic combination, but we don't change the form. But it's interesting that this duality that we've been talking about, Greek instruments, bouzouki, and non-Greek instruments, bassoon, French horn, trombone, cello, mix beautifully together.
This is
very true. That's why the problem with Andrea Ruiz, he mentioned that takes from 3 minutes and makes it to 7 minutes, and it becomes it's like he took the Carmina Burana, the first movement of Carmina Burana, from 2 minutes and 15 seconds up to 8 minutes. So it loses something. You add something which does not exist in the movie, in the music itself.
You mentioned just before the bouzouki. It's important to remember that for many people in the Western world, that moment of hearing that instrument for the first time, that was very likely the first time they'd ever heard that instrument before. And it's come to it's come to define for many what Greek music is. Is that justified, do you think? Is it a good representation?
I think it's justified. In 2004, I spent about 3 months in Greece, and I heard bouzouki day in, day out, and I loved it. And I came back to Australia, and I love living here. I love Australia. I love rock music. I love classical music, symphonic orchestral music. But it was really, really jarring to me. And I remember it so palpably. It was really jarring to me. I always loved, and I still do, and during, when I was living in Greece, I always loved Beatles and Mozart and all that outside of Greece. But I got so used to hearing the beautiful bouzouki sound that when I came to Australia, oh my God, did I miss it?
Yeah.
And I'm going, what's this shit distorted guitar sound? Why are they using that? I got over it eventually, but the sound of the bouzouki, there's something. It's clean. It evokes emotion. There's something about it that I can't really put my finger on it. And when you're used to it, and then you don't have it all of a sudden, it's like, what?
You notice it.
My God, do you notice it?
It's funny because I was watching a documentary not long ago about the bouzouki, where they interviewed a number of players. And that whole thing where sound is visualized in colors.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically what he said is, the bouzouki is important because if you were going to characterize the color would be gold.
Right. Yes.
You know what I mean? And that to me has come to characterize personally how I felt about that instrument after hearing that. Yeah. I can't not see that anymore.
Yeah. It's certainly shiny. Gold or silver, I don't know, but it's certainly shiny. And relating this to Zorba was a lover of life. And when you're in love with life, things shine. We love it. We love an ocean view because it's not only because of the color blue, but it's how it shines. And the bouzouki shines.
Yes.
Also, can I add something to what you said about bouzouki? 1964, bouzouki was still not accepted in Greece. It was banned.
That's a good point.
You couldn't hear that from the radio, right? You couldn't hear that from the official sort of channels of the state. Kazantzakis first, and then Theodorakis, made it artistic. created art through the bouzouki.
Yeah.
Because bouzouki until then was associated with the underworld of drugs, hashish, and brothels that we had in my city of Piraeus. And I grew up next to a famous rebeti called Yenitsaris. And Yenitsaris, who actually told me what we're doing, what we're going through, it's because he was an addict, and he was playing only to get money for drugs, this kind of thing. With Theodorakis and Kazantzakis, that came out of that.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, right.
And so the music of Zorba made bouzouki mainstream in Greece as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Wow.
That's an extremely important point.
Made it mainstream and actually made it an artistic sort of a thing that today we cannot understand Greek music without that, as you understand. Until then, it was something in between. Now it's for the hoi polloi, for the proletarians, from this kind of thing. And suddenly, Theodorakis makes high art with that. And to this, as a historian of Greek cinema, I must say that happens through the cinema first.
Yes.
And in a piece like Action Esti, which we talked about the esotericness of the Genesis, which is first movement, which is purely orchestral, no bouzouki. But then we kick into Anatochelidoni and Tizikiossinis Ilionoite and Tisarapis Emata, which has popular bouzouki music, and so the duality of the bouzouki with symphonic orchestral instruments, that word duality again.
And the Sarapis Emata, that dialogue between the bouzouki and the French horn is amazing. Oh my God.
We could do a whole podcast on just that.
We should.
How did he do that? It becomes really sort of a kind of... But he made it acceptable as a classical instrument as well, all right, in Greek, because until then the bouzouki had three chords, as you understand, and then Chiotis added the fourth one and became much more sort of a rich, the sound and this. But Theodorakis took that thing and made it, as he said, I fused Vamvakaris, Tsitsanis with classical music.
Yes.
And suddenly you have this incredible sort of a kind of sound, which is the sound of modern Greece, as you understand. Because, the final question is, do we belong to the East or the West? What is this character? Is this...
That's an
good
interesting question. I've been thinking about that, because last time I spoke with you two lovely gentlemen, I referred to... You asked me about Greekness and Australianness. I referred to the Australianness as the Western part, and I used Greek as the non-Western part. And I was thinking about that afterwards. I'm thinking, hang on, in answer to your question, or, talking to your question, was I right in saying Greek is not part of the West? Is Greek part of the West, or is it not part of the West?
As the cradle of Western civilization.
There you
it's
go.
Always an
Is
interesting
it
question.
still West?
Yes.
Well, I think that we are Mediterranean. At the crossroads, Balkan, Middle Eastern cultures, African cultures, Italian and European. Because we're not Germans.
No.
And there is no reason to be Germans, as you understand. We're not Scandinavians, and there is no reason to be Scandinavians, all right? It's a difference between, as you see, a film by Angelopoulos and a film by Bergman. Bergman always lived this existential guilt. Do I have the right to exist? Calvinism of the North. No Greek was ever asking that one. Do I have the right to exist? True. A Greek will ask, does life has the right to exist without me?
Good point.
Very interesting. As you think, this question is very important, I think. Where do we belong? Because the Greeks have a dichotomy in their identity question, which we experience here in Australia as well. Exacerbated or even made sometimes more intense by the Australian culture as well. You Greek, Western, and ethnic at the same time. When are we going, after so many generations, you're born here, you gentlemen, right? After so many lives in this place, years, in this, are you still ethnics?
Interesting.
Wow.
I mean, and I just find it so angry when I say in Australia, you know, I said, guys, these people are born here, are here in this country since 1900s. They cannot be ethnics after 120 years here, you know, just...
Yeah. But it's a great point you raise. We're at the crossroads of North Africa, Asia, Europe, and then
Balkans. Don't forget the Balkans.
and the Balkans, which is unique in itself. So I guess we're our identity, I guess.
Yeah. And those sensibilities come through, I feel, in Zorba, the combination of all those things, as well as in the music.
Yes.
Yeah, music.
All of these, you know, all of these elements together.
True.
You know, to sort of sum it all up, all of these elements together. You know, and we spoke earlier about from the cinematography, from the combination of the actors, the story itself, all the sensibilities.
If you
and
go to
context.
Corfu, are you from Corfu?
I am.
From Corfu?
Yes.
What's your music there?
Well, viola and
Italian.
guitars.
Italian.
It is, yeah.
It's tarantellas. You know, because
They
you
play
Candadas.
cricket on there. On
yeah,
Corfu.
cricket as well. Yeah. But the music, the Italian music, you know, it's predominantly Italianate. You know, just this kind of.
What did you say, tarantella?
Tarantella.
Isn't it like the
Or cantadas is the
Cantadas and
yeah.
tarantella. Tarantella is a good, you know, the dances that you have there. You know, in the Peloponnese, we have Kalamatiano. In the islands, completely different things. You know, just then in the
got the
Rhodes,
Chamiko and
Crete, Chamiko and Epiro. Crete, they have a completely different sensibility. Kazantzakis used to call this the multi-eyed identity of Greece, that we have many polyomati, we have too many eyes, he says.
Yes.
And I choose what you call the kritiki matia, the Cretan glance, as you call it.
Beautiful. Love it.
And he saw through the Cretan glance. You have the Corfu. Are you from Corfu?
Yes.
Oh my God! You know, just you know,
Corfu.
That's why we love it.
I've got the madness too.
No, my parents were from Alexandria.
That complicates even more.
What did they say? Twice Greek.
Twice Greek, yeah. Because as you remember, my first book was on Manoli Laskaris, who was from Alexandria.
Yes. Yeah.
And he said, Kavafi never went to Greece. Kavafi, the great poet, is a quintessentially Greek, where having lived in Greece for 6 months, essentially, his whole life.
What's what they say, that the diaspora of Greeks are more Greek than the Greeks themselves.
Very true. And more, I think, they know what is more, if I may use a term which is really controversial, is essential to the identities of people, all right? Which is what? I mean, you will tell us. I think that's why I was asking George Miller, where is the Greek element in you? Your family is totally Greek. I've met his family, you know, just totally Greek. There's nothing in Mad Max.
It's very interesting. You know, the catch cry is write what you know. If he's come from that sort of background and there's no element of that in his writing, it's very interesting.
Well, why I mention this, because I think that Zorba gave cultural confidence to the Greeks to declare their identity as well. Before that, as Greeks, because of the Turkish occupation, we had internalized a sense of historical inferiority in front of the Western people.
All right.
The so-called famous expression, psorokostena. I don't know if you have heard the word psorokostena.
I haven't, no.
Kostena, the wife of Costa, with psoriasis, psorokostena. It was the idea that we had in the 50s, actually when most of these migrants came to Australia. Έρχομαι από την psorokostena, which was the low class, as you understand, the whole thing. And Zorba the Greek, for the first time, declared a cultural confidence, a cultural optimism, as I said, and solid core to the culture itself. You know, that Theodorakis, actually, I think that, and with his work, with his whole work, managed to do that. As he said, and I wrote an article about this, I loved his statement in 1988, I'm not interested in the least in what Europe is doing musically at the moment. Which is really...
So to sum that up, really, life was imitating art on the back of...
On the back, yeah.
But
But how can I say that? It's a vicious circle. Yes. Life imitates art, and art imitates life after a while, right? You know, the whole thing.
Yeah.
You are born Zorba, the elements of Zorba, by watching Zorba, you become what you see.
Great question.
Wow.
Nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But this is inevitable, as you understand, right? You will be... I mean, I have read... I remember I was 19 years old when I read Zorba in Greek. I just was The Greeks didn't like Zorba, don't like Kazantzakis, first of all. Because Kazantzakis is in this eternal rebellion, the rebellious spirit. You know, to accept nothing, I believe nothing, I hope nothing, I'm free, as you see on his grave, all right? You know, in Greek official culture is more, I don't know if you've heard the Papadiamandis, orthodox, a bit, you know, pessimistic, highly, how can I say that, you know, just defeatist at a certain stage. You know, God has created this history for me and I have to participate, do whatever I can, but I know that I will be crushed by God at the end. Whereas Kazantzakis gives you this incredible thing, you know, just I am who I am.
Yeah.
I'll do what I can do, and even if I fail, I will fail because I try to do something.
Yeah.
So both the book and the movie gave this cultural confidence, I believe, to the Greeks. In the diaspora, that's why there's no place in the world without Zorba restaurant.
Very true.
Actually, a few years ago, I was in Phuket, and there was a Zorba restaurant there, and then I traveled in Vietnam. The most popular place is called Zorba.
Wow.
Well, look, gentlemen, I think we could go on for the next 6 hours talking about this.
And we will.
And
Okay,
it's
so
endless.
next question. No, just joking. I wish.
We're honoured to have both of you gentlemen here. You know, Vrasidas, obviously for your insights into, you know, into this story, and no doubt we'll have you back to talk about more things. And George, obviously, no one knows Mikis Theodorakis like George Ellis. Let's just put it.
He was the man.
Music
he was
in
the
general,
man.
and you met him as well personally.
I had the great privilege of meeting him. His mind has told me I was to meet him for only 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I tried to politely excuse myself, and he said, "Where are you going? Do you have plans?" I said, "No." I said, "I just didn't want to overstay my welcome." He said, "Well, if you've got no plans, sit down. What are you doing?" That's 3 hours later, we're still talking.
That Cretan hospitality.
You don't have
He
a
was an
photo
amazing
with him,
man.
do you?
Sorry?
Do you have a photo with him?
I do.
Wow.
Oh,
Can you send
wow.
it to us?
Yes, I will.
We'll
Share that.
I will.
I met him years ago when he was composing Antigone, his opera,
The opera. Yeah.
which I think it's
I love
amazing.
Antigone.
It's an incredible thing. And his second symphony, based on the Irene Sinfonia by Ritsos.
Yes.
You know, this kind of things, because he met, you know, he wanted to make something on Ritsos, but not the Romeosini and the political songs, but something much more sort of like an intimate, something more as he said, a beautiful word, I don't know, what's the word in English for that? Trifero, which means tender, affectionate. Πολύ πιο τρυφερός, you know, just, and he may make this incredible word, you know, just μια τρυφερή συμφωνία μου λέει ήθελα να κάνω, which is amazing, you know, just this kind of things. Wow. And I helped him with some things in the text when he was doing that, and then he was, you know, Theodorakis was always Theodorakis, as you understand, larger than life, larger than 3 lives, you know.
And he was really large.
Really
he was tall.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point to sort of wrap this up. Thank you so much for all of those stories. Unbelievable. Vrasidas, thank you very much. George, thank you very much. Nick, final thought, mate. What do you reckon?
Oh, look, I'm mesmerised. As you know, look,
I told you it would happen.
I don't want to label our podcast, but this is probably one of my favourites now.
Is it really?
Talking history, talking philosophy, having alcohol. I think
I've got to say, as well as talking to you any day of the week, which I'd love to do, I can listen to this amazing professor day in, day out, forever. He's what he doesn't know is not worth knowing. Yeah. And so
Agreed.
Thank you for inviting me in his presence, in your presence. I'm really privileged to be here, and I'm glad to be here. So thank you.
You're so welcome, mate. You're part of the family, and like
Absolutely.
Vrasidas,
I'm here next week.
Part of the family, and we are going to invite you back again.
Thank you so much for this. It's great because I think, I mean, as you understand, we all live in a Platonic dialogue.
Sure. Yeah.
And we contribute.
Yeah. What blew me away as well, again, we can talk about this. You had a car accident.
Yeah,
you weren't able to get here today. I picked you up And the drive from your place to my place, oh my God, you blew my mind. I thought you are like my best friend. I love you. You are fucking a champion. And this is what I love. And me and Tom have these conversations all the time. We walk up and down Botany Bay, Brighton Sands, talk about philosophy and history. And
I loved it. Without having met before, we started talking about the most profound thing. The blah, 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 blah. I think we knew each other from, long before.
But he has that quality about him, doesn't he? As soon as you meet him, you feel like you've known. As soon as you meet Vrasidas, you feel like you've met him, before.
Yes.
Somehow. Yeah.
Mate,
You're a special man, mate.
So you are all special.
You summed it up well, George. It's per year. It's like my lost long brother. You're lover of Greek history, Byzantine,
Greek history,
and modern history of Greece, and so
I have given an interview recently on ABC late night show, whatever they call it, on Bubulina.
Wow. And she was Zorbas mentioned her.
Bubulina, it's a name.
Exactly.
Bubulina.
That was his
Haidευτικό. To this day, when you want to say the woman is gutsy, and Bubulina, he called it.
And one last thing, actually, we didn't ask where Vrasidas was from. Do you want to tell us where you're from, your history, your ancestry?
Oh my God.
There was a bit of a connection possibly with me and you.
As I mentioned to you, my DNA was totally erroneous. Even found something from the Baltic Sea. But I was born in Pyrgos, Olympia. So Olympia. My father's from Olympia and my mother from the town of Crescena. But I grew up in Olympia where the Olympic Games began.
Sure.
There, very interesting. The valley of Alpheus River.
Beautiful.
Which is really a sort of a kind, if I may say, the most...
But you did a DNA testing and your ancestors came back as...
Anything.
Hang on a second.
I thought I would be a bit of...
you're from Epiro.
I thought I would be a bit of Turkish or Albanian or something. Nothing. It was... listen to this now. It was Baltic Sea, Lithuanian, Latvian, and this kind of things.
Yes. Well, blue eyes.
Greek, Italian, Dutch.
Wow.
Hang on a second.
I said,
you told me on the car trip here, you got a bit of Epirodi in you.
Epirodi, my great.
That's all I want to hear.
Grandfather.
That's what he's digging for.
He's going for his
Suli, from Suli after...
You're a Suliotti like me.
But the
probably related.
The other great grandfather was called Venetsanakos, the Venetian.
So
he probably related to Tom.
Venetian.
Maybe.
And then, as I said, we have all this incredible DNA, which I don't really believe the DNA test. I think it's highly imaginative. They recreate your origins. But they found this Dutch, they found this Baltic, they found this thing. What am I doing here? I said, where is my soul? The source of my existence.
You're an Epiroti, mate.
An Epiroti, yeah. And then finally, you're from Corfu?
I am from Corfu, yes. Entirely.
Both mother and father?
Yes. And wife.
And wife.
Everyone. As far back as we know, yes.
In the words of great...
Epiro. So my great grandparents, Epiroti, from Suli, the mountains of Suli.
In the words of the great Mikis Theodorakis, που να βρω τη ψυχή μου. Ψυχή, psyche, right?
Psyche, το τετράφυλλο δάκρυ.
Beautiful. Well said, George.
Το τετράφυλλο δάκρυ. You know that Angelopoulos made this incredible film, Ulysses Gaze, the music by Karaindro, if you remember that one. And it starts like that one. The famous Platonic statement. If a soul, a psyche, wants to find another psyche, psyche, is psychin vlepteon, must look into another.
Oh my
psyche.
God. Wow. Talk about tingles.
Is psychin vlepteon.
Is that where Platon said humans are created with 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs?
Symposium.
And we split in half and you spend the rest of your life...
That's love.
Trying to find your other half.
The quest for the other half is Symposium.
That's beautiful.
The speech of Aristophanes, which is an incredible thing. I mean, whoever loves like this, trying to find what is missing, the other half that was cut off by the gods.
Yes.
Beautiful. The half of themselves.
Let's just explore this.
Yeah.
For the next 7 hours.
You know what this has just reminded me of? You know how they say that when it's time to leave, they say goodbye and then they never leave? It's like for the next 3 hours you're at the door.
And at that moment they say the most important things.
Yes,
exactly.
Exactly.
How deep was the last 5 minutes?
Τα λέμε στα ελληνικά, the κουβέντες του διαδρόμου, the
Yes.
corridor, because in the διάδρομος, in the corridor, you simply announce the most important thing.
Exactly.
It's like a conclusion, the finale. It's like a bang.
Yeah.
More
Well,
important.
that's exactly what we've done.
That's right. We've run out of Tsikodia.
Oh,
Run
no.
out, yeah.
Well, that's
We've
it.
polished
I'm out
one
of here
bottle.
then.
1.5 actually.
Oh, dear. Well, guys, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Guys, email us at ouzotalk@outlook.com. Find us on social media at Ouzo Talk and Ouzo_talk on Instagram. Nika Thanasiou, thank you very much, mate.
Awesome. Tom, you're a champion. Awesome. It's been fantastic. I
Good
love
on you,
it.
mate.
I've had too much to drink.
I think so too, yeah.
I think we all have.
Oh, dear.
I love it.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks for joining us in the distillery, guys. We'll see you next time.
Ακολουθήστε μας στο Soundees, στο Spotify, στο Apple Podcasts και στο Google Podcasts.